Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us on this Monday evening for a fantastic webinar we've got lined up for you. I'm Varun Sriram with Generation UCAN, and I'm thrilled to be talking about a really fascinating topic today with two absolutely terrific guests. Our topic for today's webinar is going to be running nutrition for weight loss. It's that time of year, early in the year, where a lot of you folks might be right into your resolutions, really looking to start the year off on a good note. For others, it might just be something that has been something you've been trying to achieve out of training for several years. So yeah, we really want to explore that topic, and no two better people than to do this with than our two guests today, Greg McMillan and Dr. Cathy Yeckel. Greg, Cathy, how are you guys doing today?
Very good.
Doing great, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate both you guys taking time out of your schedules. Greg, let's start with you. So you are a running coach, coach a wide range of athletes from Boston Marathon runners, Olympians, everyday athletes trying to achieve their health and fitness goals. You're also a exercise scientist, have your degree in that. How did this whole idea of running and nutrition for weight loss become something that's interest to you?
Well, because I get asked about it almost every day. I think we're all trying to be, an appropriate leanness. We're trying to achieve our weight loss goals or our body sort of look and feel that we like. Most of us have a little excess that we'd like to get rid of these days, and so it's a topic that as a coach, you're constantly sort of have this battle between you've got to fuel yourself because you are training, but you also would prefer to maybe lose a little weight. And so working with so many runners, you find the tricks and the tips that end up helping people to lose weight while they're still training, so they don't suffer a real loss in training quality just because they're trying to lose weight. And there's sort of a fine balance there. So it's a really important topic for runners, for everybody for sure, but in particular for runners where they're trying to balance their nutrition needs for running with trying to lose weight.
Now, Dr. Cathy Yeckel on with us as well, assistant clinical professor at the Yale School of Public Health, done a lot of fascinating research on the human metabolism and a wide variety of other areas. Cathy, similar question to you. You are a runner yourself. Why is this topic of running nutrition for weight loss of particular interest to you?
I think this is one of the topics that, particularly as a woman and a runner, I think most people face at some point, and a lot of us struggle our whole life. So I've been a runner for a really long time, and it's one of those areas that I think both myself and all my fellow runners that we would team up, and it's always an issue. So I think for me it becomes very intriguing from a mechanistic standpoint, from what's going on in the body, why is it tricky, why, so it's all the ins and outs of why it's happening, or can we figure out what's happening, because it's obviously a very complicated issue. But so that's, I think for me, it's both sides. It's like you see the problem, but you also kind of want to figure out what to do about it.
Without question. So with that, kind of our first big picture topic is why run for weight loss? And as a way to introduce our discussion, Cathy, I'll start with you. Is there any, in the research, is there anything significant, any significant advantage when it comes to running versus, say, walking for people that are interested in achieving weight loss?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of long studies now, long in terms of numbers of years, and one has been done when they've been comparing the national runners versus the national walkers survey groups. And so these are studies that have been going on, say, for 6 or so years, and they've now been able to sort of determine that that there are great health effects for both walking and running, but pretty much hands down, both your BMI and your waist circumference will decrease more if you're running versus the sort of the same METs per day kind of equivalent if you're just walking. So it's very, very intriguing, because it's not just an obvious. It's more calories when you're running, but it isn't just that. There probably has a lot to do with how much you're burning after you run, for instance. So as they've looked at it with lots and thousands of runners and thousands of walkers, it really looks like there's a benefit to running in terms of weight control and weight loss. And then as you age, it's even more critical because there's this tendency to gain weight, as we all know, as we age, and running versus walking seems to be more beneficial in trying to keep that weight off.
So, with that context, if we have accepted that running is very beneficial for weight loss, and it's more beneficial than walking, the fact remains that everybody that runs isn't losing weight. So, Greg, for you, coaching thousands of runners like you've done, what are some of the challenges, excuse me, that runners are expressing to you when it comes to losing weight?
Well, it's really interesting because a lot of runners, say they're new runners, and they join, say, a charity marathon group, and they're going to train for their first marathon. They think that's going to be a great avenue to lose a lot of weight, but they end up not losing any weight or sometimes gaining weight through this training process, and it seems very confusing to them. And so we have to do a lot of education about how nutrition, there's kind of two sides of it. There's the side that's just for your health, and there's the side that's for performance. And depending on your level of training, you have to be careful because you can overeat even when you're training a lot, which for a lot of times people, they feel like that's not possible, that if you're going for runs, you will lose weight. And we just know that you've got to be smart about your nutrition in order to lose weight. And there's so many people that would like to be leaner, and sometimes even though they're running, they're not getting lean, that we realize that we need to be more specific, and we need to better understand how nutrition plays a role, not just in fueling their running, but helps them to lose weight, and how those two can play together. And that's what I get a lot, is how can I lose that I want to lose 5 pounds or 10 pounds. I want to get rid of that. That's left over from something. I want to get rid of it, and how do I do it while I run?
Cathy, there's kind of a lot of different maybe philosophies on this when it comes to percentages, but what would you say to address the impact of the training versus the nutrition on weight loss? Like, for example, Greg mentioned how many people sign up for a marathon through a charity group and they just assume because they're doing the training that the weight's going to come off. I mean, for us, we're at with UCAN, we're at 50 to 60 marathon expos a year, or I should say just various running events a year. And there's so many runners that will come up and we'll talk to at different events that kind of identify that problem that Greg just talked about. They've signed up for an endurance event, they've done all the training, but the weight hasn't come off. Where does that factor in terms of training versus nutrition?
Well, I think let's start with one study that's helpful to a lot of people. And if you take novice runners and you take one that just do the running, don't modify anything about their diet, they can, if they've really increased their running, they actually can lose body fat, they can lose weight. But the runners, those novice runners, so they haven't run before really, they're just starting their programs, those that actually attend to both their running and their diet will lose more fat, okay? They'll lose more weight, they'll lose more fat. And I think one of the big concerns is we know that if you even take a really well-trained runner and tell them to eat as much as eat to compensate for what they just did running, they will eat 2 to 3 times as much as they really burned off. So even somebody that's really well trained, now of course the really well trained person, they've gotten used to it, but if you specifically ask them to do that, say, okay, go eat exactly what you just burned off, everyone overcompensates. It's classic. It's a classic problem. So with people who are really novice at it, I know so many people, and I don't know what the statistics are for this, but in terms of the first marathon, it is so common for people to gain weight. And then as they realize that, oh, okay, wait a minute, this isn't working. This is, I'm actually eating too much. That's what they figure out. They finally figure out it's not the license to eat. And I think particularly for women, that's a very, very difficult concept, because oftentimes what happens is that with men, you tend to have more appetite suppression particularly after a hard run, than you do with women. Women tend to have a stronger appetite, oftentimes stronger hunger after they work out, and so it's something that they're constantly battling, and they have to learn the tricks to how to get around that.
I
Interesting.
think
So,
that is such a great point, Kathy, because that is exactly what's happening to so many runners. I'm sure a lot of people that are listening just went, "That's it." So the problem is, I think I ran, and so I feel like I need to refuel and I deserve this, and so I can eat more because I'm training. But yet, if they're eating 2 to 3 times what they really needed to replace, it's no shock that people struggle with losing weight if they're not controlling their diet some.
so both of you, I guess identified one thing that's very common. That idea, Greg. You've talked about this before. You and I have spoken about this before. But that idea of reward eating, and especially kind of overcompensating post workout. So we'll get to kind of the science behind why this may be happening, and touch on that a little bit further. But what are some other mistakes, Greg? That I'll start with you. What are some other common things that say that person training for their first race might make? And perhaps we can kind of break this up into three different periods. We've talked a little bit about that post workout period. What are some common mistakes people might make with their pre workout nutrition?
Well, a lot of times they think I'm a runner, so I need a carbo load for my running. And they don't. You don't need a carbo load to go out for a 30-minute run or even an hour run. You don't need to. So suddenly they feel like the majority of their diet needs to come from carbohydrates. They really begin to focus on that. But like we've just mentioned, they're not necessarily burning. They don't need to make that big a switch when they turn to running. They don't have to make such a wholesale change. So the mistake that at least I feel like a lot of runners make is that now they say, okay, I need to eat like a runner. And so their perception of that is that they have to have lots more carbohydrate. And that typically is not a great strategy for losing weight. That's a good strategy for gaining weight. And it can work if you're training really, really hard. And maybe people read about what some elite runners who run 15 to 20 miles per day, what they eat. But that's obviously, we're not doing that. We're running much, much less than that. And so that's, I think, the primary issue that I see with people is that they just go full bore into eating so much carbohydrate all the time, and that is not, in my opinion, a great way to lose weight.
Cathy, Greg talked about that idea of eating a lot of carbohydrate, and this is something we'll get into, but, I think it's not just the fact that it is carbohydrate, but perhaps also the type of carbohydrate and the quality of carbohydrate. Greg talked about that from a pre-workout standpoint. What about during a run? What's going on when the typical runner is consuming something continuously during the run to get them through a run? Why would that not be beneficial for weight loss?
Can I say something about the pre-workout
Yeah, yeah,
first?
please do. Please do.
Before we get into during, I think people, along with what Greg is saying in terms of the idea that people are constantly just sort of switching to, okay, I need to eat a lot of carbohydrate, they may not realize that if you eat a lot of carbohydrate right before you work out, you basically will negate, and oftentimes you won't see the same training benefits as you do. So the muscle doesn't, it always sees fuel, so it doesn't need to try to adapt and burn more fat, for instance. So it's oftentimes it doesn't also grow the glycogen pool potential, so that when you are in maybe in a race scenario that you have more to rely on. So it's sometimes when you're eating too much before you work out and you have too much fuel there, your muscles, everything in your body doesn't have to go through the same kinds of training adaptations because it already sees enough fuel.
And when you're talking about that, Cathy, I mean, it kind of, if we look at the slide on the screen, so many of the runner foods, as I kind of refer to them as the bagels, the bananas, carbohydrate rich foods, even the sports nutrition products, the gels, the chews, the different sugar based drinks. are these all having that type of impact that you're talking about? Whether we're talking about carbohydrates from food or carbohydrates from sports nutrition?
Yes, I mean, I think there are differences in quality of carbohydrates, but all the pictures that you've just shown, where it's very, very fast, simple carbohydrates, you're going to see that hit the system very quickly, which means you're going to have an insulin surge, which we're going to talk about later in the webinar, but it starts to dictate what the metabolism is going to be required. It's going to require the body's using a lot of burning a lot of carbohydrates. So all you're doing is you're setting the body up to burn a lot of carbohydrates, and so you're not allowing the body to try to deplete its fat stores at a time when it could normally be trying to mobilize its fat and burn that for a substrate instead for fuel.
So the question then there, and Greg, I'll throw this to you, is how did we get here? How did we get to the point where a lot of runners are looking to achieve weight loss, yet a lot of runners are being advised or think what they need to have before they go out for a run is something that's rich in fast-acting carbohydrates? Where did this come about?
Well, I think the early research when exercise scientists were evaluating what does it take to perform well, they realized that, yeah, if you don't have anything during, extended exercise, then your performance will decline. So you need to fuel. And that got extended to, well, if I need to fuel for running, then maybe I need to fuel before it as well. And maybe if the more I fuel before it, the better it will be. And it's just sort of lent itself to being like a lot of things, right? It got taken somewhat out of context. And with sports nutrition, of course, you had the beginnings of the commercial part of sports nutrition. And anytime you have marketing behind it, that can take any little quote from any research and then blast it out as the end-all be-all. So I feel like, again, there's just a lot of misinformation about what is absolutely necessary to fulfill your performance for that day. And we have to be careful in looking at research to understand what was the study set up for. I've seen studies where they've given athletes candy bars and versus nothing. And the people with candy bars were able to run longer than the ones that you give anything. And I was like, well, of course, that makes sense. But the purpose was that study was funded by a candy bar manufacturer. And so they were trying to say, see, our candy bar improves endurance performance by 37% or whatever it was. And I was like, but that's wrong. You're missing the point. That's not what it's about. And so I think we've just kind of gotten away from what's actually happening. And like Cathy was saying, we know that for a lot of exercise, you don't really want to be over fueling for that exercise because we want the body to be challenged. We want it to be stressed in certain ways so that it will increase its ability to burn fat, you'll burn more calories, and you achieve the weight loss that you want. And so we can't just, it's not a blanket, do this for every run, because every run is not the same. A 30-minute run, an hour run, a 2-hour run, a 30-minute easy run, a 30-minute hard run, a race, those are all kind of different. And so we need to be smart and think about, what am I trying to get out of this run? And if it is, oh, I want to lose weight and I want to improve my fat burning, then we know you don't want to be having a big sugar surge before that activity. That would not be a positive toward our goals. And so I just think things kind of got out of hand with marketing and research, and sometimes there being a conflict there. And then we've just sort of talked about sports nutrition as one thing, mainly related to performance, and not about, okay, how does it fit into your total life and what your goals are.
And Greg, just to hit on that last point you said, I mean, with all the athletes you coach, right? Like everybody is trying to get faster, but how many? I guess what is that balance between trying to get faster and trying to be healthy? Is some type of health and fitness goal part of almost every athlete that you coach? How prevalent is it?
Well, I think everybody wants to be fit and healthy, and they would like to be lean, They would like to achieve their, whatever they feel like is their racing weight, if you will, and their performance is important. But you have to remember that if you look across a runner's week, even someone that's in heavy training for a big event, there's only 2 or 3 runs per week that are really should be a big challenge. Most of the work is just easy running. I mean, that's even the pros, even though they might run, 15 miles per day, most days for them it's not a hard run. They have their 2 or 3 days per week that are really hard. And so just think it's, for most of us, we don't have to have this excessive, to me it's excessive fueling. And one of the things that I learned, and Cathy can speak to it better than I can, but if you overconsume carbohydrates, there is a mechanism that turns that into body fat. So sometimes I think that runners get this idea that carbohydrates are good fuel, so the more of those I get, the better. But it's only as good as to what you need, and anything excess of that can actually get converted into body fat. And that's what I think is another problem with this scenario of you're running, you're eating like a runner, but then you're not, you still feel like you're not losing weight. You still have that body fat, and it's that mechanism. If you're just pouring carbohydrate in, it's going to get converted to body fat, and so that's another negative for overfueling. I think is just a big problem.
So we've spent the first 15 or 20 minutes here really identifying and drilling down on some of the challenges runners face. And I think if we were in an auditorium right now, I could see several of the 100 people that are in attendance tonight, kind of nodding their head like, yep, that resonates with me. Yep, I felt that. I want to take the next 15 minutes or so to dive a little bit into the science and kind of talk about the why behind a lot of these challenges. And then we'll take the following time after that to kind of identify some practical strategies and talk about where UCAN fits into this whole picture that we've been talking about. So, Cathy, from a science standpoint, Greg just had a great segue over to you. But many of the things we've talked about so far, that sort of the overconsumption of calories, that post-workout hunger, that inability to burn fat, as well as you should be burning fat during a run, it's all tied back into your blood sugar and your insulin and the impact that a lot of these foods we've been talking about have on your blood sugar and insulin. So I guess to the folks in the audience, can you explain to people, kind of what your blood sugar is, what your insulin is, and why they should pay attention to it and why it impacts weight loss? I asked you like 6 things over there, so feel free to tackle them as you see fit. But where does blood sugar and insulin tie into this whole picture?
Yeah, I think everybody, you've heard blood sugar, and that's the amount of sugar that's circulating in your blood, as the name would imply. But also, you may also hear blood glucose. It's the same thing. So that fuel, that carbohydrate that circulates in your blood is glucose. So regardless of what carbohydrate you eat, there's teeny, teeny, teeny little bits of fructose that will float around. But by and large, the sugar that's circulating and that's fueling us is glucose. So if you eat a complex carbohydrate, what that means is that, or something with a low glycemic index like the superstarch that fuels UCAN, it's the glucose will come off very, very slowly. Whereas if you eat something that's just like drink some juice, the sugar is coming off very, very fast. So the glucose will spike at a very high level. Like that drawing in the figure along the axis there, you see a big tall peak that's typically associated with a peak of very fast-acting sugar. So that if you've had some Coca-Cola or some orange juice or something, and sometimes there's a reason for that. If you have somebody that is having a real problem with blood sugar, you want something to be very fast. But for most of us, that's not generally a good idea. And one of the reasons it's not a good idea is because that hormone insulin that I'm sure most people have heard about at this point has to then say, okay, glucose is going up, that blood sugar is going up, so now I need to be secreted, or insulin has to be secreted to try to get the tissues like muscle to take up the extra glucose. So essentially, if you're spiking that means you have an overabundance of calories. You have an overabundance of the sugar around. Your body doesn't need it all right away, so it's having to put into a fast action, how should we get rid of this? And that hormone insulin has to be secreted. But if you start to gain weight, your muscle is now not going to see the insulin at the same low concentrations. It's going to take more and more and more insulin to do the same job, to put the sugar away, to put that extra glucose away. That's what's called insulin resistance. Your fat cells become very insulin resistant as well. But for people, one of the best things about starting to do any kind of exercise is that's the one thing about sugar control that we can control is starting to be active so the tissues become more sensitive to that insulin. So only small amounts are needed to put away any extra sugar that's coming on board. But in general, why have the extra sugar? In most cases, you don't need it. You don't want that spike. You want it to come out very, very slowly. And that's, quite frankly, the power of something like superstarch.
So that's a terrific explanation, Cathy. And so if we go back to the discussion we were having on common foods that runners are having prior to exercise, whether it's the bagel or the banana or the faster acting gel or the sports drink, those are kind of setting up what we're seeing here on the chart, right? Those are setting up that big rise in blood sugar and that need to produce insulin. Is that correct?
That's correct. And then the bigger the rise, the bigger the fall, right? So you see things crashing there. It's part of that's going to be dependent on the individual, and if you're very insulin resistant, your sugars are going to stay up and up and up and up and up, and your insulins are going to stay up for a long time as well. I've often tested obese children, and their sugar control sometimes isn't too bad, but to achieve that, their insulins are huge. Whereas the older individuals may have their sugars up, but they can't quite get their insulins up. So why tax the system by consuming high amounts of sugar that are going to be processed and peak like this, because they're absorbed so easily in the intestine, that they're going to require a big insulin response to actually put them away.
And Greg, for somebody that's training for a race for the first time, they're perhaps the person, based on what Cathy said, that least needs that traditional type of fuel if they have some type of weight loss goal in mind. But in your experience, are the folks doing this for the first time perhaps often the most guilty of overfueling just because they're so new to the game and maybe nervous about running out of energy?
Yeah, and I think they also may have never they so a common scenario is that someone's going to do a run after work, and maybe they feel slightly hungry before that run, and so they think, well, I need to fuel for this run because I'm hungry. And so they do, and maybe they fuel with something that causes exactly what you see on the screen. But they don't necessarily know that you can go run when you're hungry. That's not a problem, and it's particularly not a problem if it's just an easy run. You're just, say, running for 30 minutes at an easy pace. That is not a problem to do without, while you're a little hungry. You don't have to fuel so much for that run. And so I think more seasoned runners, they begin to realize, oh, it's okay if I'm a little bit hungry going into the run, or oh, it's just a regular run. It's not a big deal. I don't have to overfuel. And they begin to do a better job at sort of picking their battles with where they fuel. And so if it is a very important workout or a long workout or something that's going to be intense, then they focus a lot more on their pre-run fueling, and they think about that not in just right before. They're usually thinking about it in the meals leading up to it. And so they're avoiding this sort of spike and crash because they know, well, if I do take this fast-acting carbohydrate and I get into my workout, then I might have this crash, and then I usually don't feel good, and we see that with runners as well. So sometimes it's just a matter that you should be trying, and if you're trying to lose weight, you want to fuel the least amount possible. I mean, you want to ingest the least amount of calories that you can and still accomplish your running. And if you're overfueling and creating this sort of spike and crash, and then of course setting your body up to, maybe create more body fat, that's the exact opposite scenario that we want. And so I think sometimes people just have the mindset of, I'm hungry, I'm going for a run, I have to be fueled. And I think a lot of, what we learn in exercise physiology is you've got a lot of fuel on board. You've got a lot of fuel on board for most normal activity. You would have to be doing something very intense or something very long to sort of get outside of a fuel source that you have. And we know that from our evolutionary history, that we have that ability. And so that's something that I think a lot of new runners, you just feel like I've got to be so fueled all the time, and that's not really the case.
I think if I can interject here as well, I think what Greg is saying in terms of this the strategic way that individuals that have more experience training is a real key feature, because they know that after maybe they're going to have two major workouts that day, right? And that could be an incredible asset to burning calories as well as getting weight down, but it's also a training mechanism. And oftentimes what they see is like, okay, with the meal after I do my first run, I strategically can place some higher, glycemic index carbohydrates, some faster acting carbohydrates, just because the muscle is very receptive at that point. And that way they know that when they exercise later in the day, now all of a sudden it makes a difference because they've repleted. But that's a special condition, and it's one of those conditions where they're doing it very strategically, and they're not overfueling then. They're just they're timing their fuel very carefully so that it benefits them later in the day. So I think it's what he's gotten at in terms of you have to be careful not to overfuel, but you also have to think strategically about when you can fuel, and that you don't necessarily need to, you can go a little bit hungry. I completely agree. And not only that, you want to, not only to burn calories, but to actually have the muscle adapt to be able to then in the end burn more fat even at rest.
Cathy, to speak to your point, of the strategic refueling, perhaps after a run. So that kind of speaks to knowing what you're doing and what type of athlete you are. When there's that notion of, oh, I just went out for a training run, I burned a bunch of carbs, I got to eat a big pasta dinner, right? That's kind of needs to be thought about more strategically for most folks, especially if they have weight loss goals.
Yes, absolutely. So again, it's not about overfueling. It's about doing it in a very surgical way, so that you're taking in enough, just a small amount that helps, and then supplementing with something that's going to last and bring on the glucose very slowly to keep repleting the muscle the way it needs, and to keep your blood sugar stable. So it's a lot of exercise is really thinking about how do you make every calorie count. It's not about overfueling. It's about being very strategic about what you're eating.
Now, one more thing I wanted to ask you about, Cathy, is Greg brought this idea up, and I think you did too, of people overfeeding after the workout, and in some cases it may be perception of how much they burned, and in other cases it might simply be because they feel very, very hungry. And oftentimes we find in what we've heard that it's tied into this whole notion of this fluctuating blood sugar throughout a run. How does this variance in blood sugar, this up and down effect, impact somebody's hunger?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, even if you're not running, if you take people and you give them, say you give them a glass of juice, and then you just have them go along and they have them tell you when they want to eat again, all of them will tell you that they want to eat again the minute their glucoses start to basically descend sharply. So if your blood sugar is going down very, very quickly, everyone will want to eat, and that it's a mechanism to protect against hypoglycemia. So it's an evolutionary perspective. It has less to do with the need to actually consume more calories, and it's a protective mechanism because your body, your brain thinks that you're going to get too low of blood sugar and that you're going to have problems. So it's having to have big swings up and big swings down will really drive hunger. And it's the individuals that can keep, if you eat so that you keep your glucose steady, you just won't be prompted to eat as frequently, and that's a very good thing. So that's why, and you take the extreme where you have the somebody that can't produce their own sugar, like the people with glycogen storage disease, where the UCAN was designed for them, the superstarch. Those individuals overnight, they can go for 9 hours just because on a single dose of the superstarch, just because it dribbles it out slowly and keeps their blood sugar stable. So it's like the penultimate show, a demonstration of the fact that you could, if you just have lovely stable glucose, then you don't need to have all these extra calories constantly that are just designed as a evolutionary trigger to make sure that you're not going hypoglycemic, or that, which means having low blood sugar.
So, Cathy, this is a great segue to kind of introduce UCAN into the discussion. And I think to put a bow on what we've talked about so far, it's safe to say that controlling your blood sugar and preventing those fluctuations is really so vital to all of the things that Greg and Cathy have identified when it comes to achieving your weight loss goal as a runner. Just to do a quick recap, if you're going to cause that big rise in blood sugar prior to your run, we've heard that you're not going to be able to burn fat as efficiently because you're causing a rise in that hormone insulin, which is going to cause you to store more of that carbohydrate away rather than burn it. We've also just had Cathy and Greg both kind of highlight the idea of this ravenous post-workout hunger, and we see how the fluctuations in blood sugar contribute to that. So if we can continuously keep our blood sugar steady as best as possible, we're going to be able to combat a lot of the things that are causing us to gain weight as runners. And one of the tools to really do this with, that we've kind of talked a lot about what perhaps you shouldn't do, but we want to give you some good take-home solutions for what you can do. And really one of the solutions is represented by UCAN, which is really, really unique from a carbohydrate and energy standpoint in terms of how the way it works. You might kind of, for those of you familiar with UCAN, you might know a little bit about this, but perhaps you haven't really thought of it in the same way. So really what UCAN was created for originally, like Cathy just talked about, was for kids with a very rare blood sugar disease called glycogen storage disease. Our founder's son, Jonah, had this disease. And Cathy, can you just kind of walk us through the challenge that kids with GSD face?
Yeah, they don't have the final enzyme in the body to be able to produce their own sugar. They have to eat the carbohydrate to maintain their blood sugar. So all of us can basically, that will store it in the liver, we'll store the blood sugar as glycogen in the liver as the main place. And between meals, we can gradually rely on that sugar because we have the enzyme that can break down and finally let that glucose molecule out into the circulation. But these kids with glycogen storage disease don't have that. So it's a very rare error of inborn metabolism, and they require this small amount of blood sugar. They can't take in a lot at once because then the liver has no problem storing it, and they would just get very, very large livers. So they need to just very slowly bring glucose online to keep their blood sugar stable.
So, what Jonah's family was really doing for the first several years of his life is they actually had to feed him every 90 minutes to 2 hours throughout the day, including 3 to 4 times in the middle of the night. And like Cathy talked about, just feed him very small amounts of starch. They were actually giving him Argo cornstarch that you can buy at the grocery store because this was one of the few carbohydrates that Jonah's body could handle. But again, he had to do this continuously, repeatedly, and it was a very stressful life for the family. There's an interesting documentary on YouTube called Life by the Clock where it shows these families having to set 3 to 4 alarm clocks in the middle of the night to make sure they didn't miss a feeding. So this is where super starch came about, and super starch is a really unique carbohydrate. The ingredient, it starts with non-GMO cornstarch. You then put it through a cooking process, just heat and water, completely natural, no chemicals or enzymes. And what this cooking process does is significantly slows the breakdown of the starch. So, Kathy, this is a line that I'm stealing from you that you told me many years ago, but it's literally delivering little bits of energy over time instead of that big rise in blood sugar that we've seen from the traditional carbohydrates that we've been talking about throughout this webinar. So with super starch, it was a great solution for Jonah and his family because of that slow and steady release. They were able to give him a large amount of it prior to sleeping at night, and it would just trickle into his system slowly and steadily and maintain his blood sugar. But as you've all heard about, it's not just kids with glycogen storage disease that need to maintain their blood sugar. Everything we've been talking about up to this point, blood sugar maintenance, is so relevant. So we started wondering, who else could benefit from the super starch? What would happen if Greg took it, if Kathy took it, if I took it? None of us have this disease. How would we respond to super starch? And basically what we wanted to do is we wanted to test our carbohydrate against maltodextrin. When I showed you a lot of the traditional sports nutrition products on the screen before, a lot of them use maltodextrin, a quote-unquote complex carbohydrate, as their main energy source. That's where the carbohydrates derive from in most of your popular sports nutrition products. But Kathy, if you could take us through what we're seeing on the screen, how is superstarch different from maltodextrin?
Well, for one, it's a very large molecule. So as you said, it's handled differently. It has a slower release from the stomach, and then it doesn't have the same rate of processing. So that's why when you look at these blood sugar peaks, the maltodextrin has a very, very tall peak because it's a very rapid acting carbohydrate, and then the superstarch is very slow, so it just has a very small, non-significant kind of peak, and it's going to progress over time so that you don't have these big crashes afterwards. You just can keep the blood sugar quite stable. And then the insulin follows suit. You don't need a big insulin response as well, because basically it can kind of go in under the radar and just gradually come onto the system, so that the pancreas doesn't even need to secrete very much insulin, because the level is just almost as if it's staying right at the regular fasting level. And that's why it's terrific, because it's not disturbing your metabolic processes. You're just allowing everything to subsist.
So if we look at the graph that we're seeing right now, comparing 25 grams of the superstarch versus 25 grams of maltodextrin, you see that the red line, the superstarch, like Kathy just talked about, doesn't have that dramatic spike and crash effect. So, on the same amount of superstarch, you're able to maintain your blood sugar or your energy for longer, and you're doing that with fewer calories. Similarly, Kathy, you just spoke to this, the insulin effect, right? So in this graph, we're looking at the insulin levels with maltodextrin versus superstarch. So again, with superstarch, because of that slow release, because there's no sugar spike like you see in the previous slide, there's no need for the body to produce insulin. And like Kathy's told us, when insulin is high, you're not going to be as efficient at burning fat. So kind of just to bring it back, Kathy, what does this show us, this insulin curve? What could this tell us about the superstarch when it comes to allowing somebody to burn fat?
Well, basically, insulin, the fat tissues are really, really sensitive to insulin. So they won't allow the breakdown of their triglyceride to provide the fatty acids. That's the currency that's similar to like glucose is the currency for carbohydrate. Fatty acids are what we burn from the triglyceride. And so essentially, you just shut off your supply of fat, of endogenous fat, from being burned, because insulin is now high. And it's saying, okay, we'll burn carbohydrate because that's what I'm trying to put away, essentially. So it's basically the insulin is saying, okay, let's take up more sugar, let's burn it, let's store it, but let's handle it all as carbohydrate, and it basically blocks your use of fat. And so if you can have tiny changes in blood glucose, if you can have tiny changes in insulin, then your metabolism can just proceed as if almost as if it's fasting. You can keep burning fat. You're not overly paying attention to carbohydrate because it's only just coming, it's dribbling on the system like a time released medicine, if you will.
So, Greg, as we kind of talk through the science, bring you back in here, what was your first experience with UCAN? And actually, I should ask this a different way. What made the connection for you with UCAN that, hey, this is something that can not only be used for performance? You know, we have athletes like Meb Keflezighi, Dathan Ritzenhein, multiple time Olympians training and really using the product because it benefits their performance. But where did it come into the picture for you that, like, hey, this can also benefit the athletes I coach or yourself personally from a weight loss standpoint?
The main thing was the ability to have stable blood glucose levels. And Cathy mentioned it before. The body's really smart in that if blood glucose levels begin to decline rapidly or they get low, then that is a signal to our body to produce hunger, feelings of I want to eat. And so my thought was that this is great if I can ingest something that will stabilize my blood glucose with a low amount of calories, then I'm going to be satiated. I am not going to feel hunger, and that's going to buy me time between my meals. So I might be able to skip a meal by having this sort of in-between shake, if you will, that will keep my blood sugar stable. So I started looking at it from when I was trying to lose weight this fall was, okay, I need to make sure that I eat the least amount of calories that I can, but yet stay satiated, not super hungry. You need to be okay with a little bit of hunger, by the way, but I couldn't be too hungry. Otherwise, I would just go to the pantry and eat anything and everything. So I needed something to kind of keep my blood sugar stable so I wouldn't get too hungry across time. And that, to me, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to keep the blood glucose stable so we don't have this sort of urge to eat just because blood glucose is getting low when we're trying to reduce our calories. And of course, we've talked about, we also don't want to be spiking insulin, which is shoving that carbohydrate, trying to get rid of it and store it in ways that we don't necessarily need. And we certainly don't want it shutting down our fat burning process, if you will. So to me, that just made sense. Could I have something that could buy me 2 or 3 or 4 hours of time where I wouldn't be hungry, I would be satiated, and I wouldn't need to consume, 300, 400, 500 calories like you might in a small meal.
And Greg, I think that's you raised many good things over there, which I want to have Cathy react to a few of them. But Cathy, to Greg's point of that blood sugar maintenance while reducing calories, like most people when they're trying to lose weight, they're not dumb, right? They'll understand to some degree that, okay, I need to reduce my intake. But what are the challenges that people face, when they are reducing their calorie intake? Like Greg just identified one of them in terms of reducing calorie intake but feeling hungry. So you may have already said this a couple different ways, but I think it's an important point to reemphasize. If our blood sugar is steady, can we almost throw some of the traditional notions of calories out the window in terms of what we think we need?
I think the biggest help that keeping your blood sugar stable, as Greg is saying, is that you're not driven to overeat, and there are just so many times during the day when it's easy to eat sort of, junk calories, I'd like to call them. You don't really need them, and yet you're hungry, so you grab them. So a lot of people like that sort of 4 o'clock in the afternoon time, right? So you've probably overeaten for lunch, and now you have this time in the afternoon where all of a sudden, or some people it's mid-morning. So it's not your meal time. It's oftentimes you end up, as Greg said, eating say even 500 calories that you don't need, but you're driven to eat them because your blood sugar isn't stable. And I think that it's really, from a practical standpoint, it's really looking at where your weaknesses are during the day, because everyone's quite different. I train in the afternoon. So for me, I often use the UCAN, the Superstarch, for lunch. That's, I'll do what Greg is doing. I'll replace my lunch with that. And then I'm good to go. I don't even think about being hungry before I work out. And that's given me that whole window of time where I'm not even thinking about food.
And I think Derek in the audience asks a good question, which Cathy, I think you just answered it to some degree. But Derek says, in terms of Greg, how many calories were you able to cut back consuming UCAN, and how healthy is that? And I think the point you just raised is it's really that ability to control overeating, right? It's not like, and Greg, maybe I'll pose this directly to you. You weren't depriving yourself, more that you were consuming something that you felt helped you prevent overeating. Is that an accurate way to put it, or maybe you put it in a better way?
Well, I wasn't worried about being unhealthy. I was trying to lose a little weight. I wasn't starving myself. What I was trying to do was say, I'm clearly eating too much because I've gained weight. And so I need to reduce my caloric intake. And so an easy way to do that is to not eat as much. But one of the problems that you run into when you're trying not to eat as much is that you become hungry. And so you're trying to eat less, but yet not be hungry. And I felt like maintaining a stable blood glucose level allowed me to do that. So I could have a healthy breakfast and I could have a healthy dinner, but I could maybe buy some time in between those two by not having to have a big meal at lunch. I could consume less calories during the lunch. So I don't like the idea of, is that healthy or not? It's not healthy for me to be gaining weight. My point was I needed to not be hungry so I could reduce weight. I was overeating. I was eating too many calories. And so if I wanted to lose weight, I had to change that scenario. And that meant trying to find something where I could eat less and not be hungry. And I want to make sure people want to take things to extreme. And I don't think anything we're talking about is extreme. We're talking about, if you're a runner and you're trying to lose weight, you need to maintain a more stable blood glucose level while you're trying to eat fewer calories so that you can lose weight. And I don't think that's unhealthy if you do it in the right way. And people can obviously take it to extremes, but that's not what I was doing at all. I was trying to essentially not eat lunch, but yet keep my blood sugar stable, and that was very successful at allowing me to lose weight and not be hungry.
I think one of the keys points that you mentioned, Greg, is that you were able to identify the issue for yourself, right? And perhaps that's even half the battle for a lot of folks. Like, you were able to pretty concretely say, like, I'm gaining weight because I'm overeating, and I need to figure out how to control this, and that's how you were able to implement UCAN. So I guess
Well, and I also want to add that it's really easy to eat poorly in the U.S. And so, you have to clean up your diet first, which I think is step one. And then if you still need to lose weight, then you've got to figure out other ways to do it. And that was the strategy. I think it's a very good strategy. It's what people do to do it in a smart way, so they're not starving themselves, not hungry all the time, because that seems to be a horrible way to live your life. So I think finding something where you can reduce your caloric intake, but yet, keep your blood sugar stable so you're not hungry is a good way to do it.
And the listeners may be interested to know that lunchtime is actually a really good time for meal replacement. We know that people will not tend to compensate when you've reduced the calories a bit at lunchtime, whereas oftentimes other meals, if you try to do that, it's not quite as successful. So we know that even if you just scale back what you're eating for lunchtime, oftentimes you will start to lose weight because you will not compensate later on. I think it's good for women to recognize, because there's a common thing that people do is they say, oh, I'll eat this now, particularly at lunchtime. This is why lunchtime is kind of key, and then I'll reduce what I'm eating at dinner. Well, people won't tend to do that. And men are much better than women at actually matching. So if say you've had an extra yogurt, the man will actually adjust a little bit better. The women will not. It won't be very effective at all. So we're not, as in general, we're very bad at saying, okay, I've eaten more for lunch, I'm going to eat less for dinner. So but lunchtime is a time when, if you do eat less, you tend not to overeat. You tend not to then put more calories in later. They've shown that in a nice study.
Good stuff.
And therefore you
Interesting.
lose weight. Those people would lose weight.
What I want to do here, Cathy and Greg, I see that we're pushing close to an hour here. If we just spend about another 10 minutes, I want to quickly run through just the 4 different UCAN products for folks and do a brief bit on their application for weight loss. And then I'll just pose some general questions to both of you before we wrap this up. So the first UCAN product is really the traditional UCAN that you see on your screen, which is the powdered carbohydrate drink mix. And this features the super starch. This is the carbohydrate that's in the product that's giving you the energy. And we already talked about the ability of super starch to maintain blood sugar. As you see, 5 different flavors, comes in packets and tubs, roughly 80 to 130 calories per serving, dependent on the packet and the tub. From Cathy, we'll start with you on this one. From a weight loss, weight management perspective, how does this fit into somebody's training and into their day?
Well, as you know, I think both Greg and I have said that we both use it oftentimes as a meal replacement, for one. So I use it very frequently at lunchtime. I always want to use it before I'm teaching in the afternoon, say. It's become a very classic sort of meal replacement for me. But I also really like it as, say, on long run recoveries. I use it for different purposes depending on what type of workout I'm going to do. But I frequently use, I always use it after long runs for sure, and usually the kind with the amino acids in it. But I also, for my regular training, I tend to use it at lunchtime, and then run in the afternoon.
So with this, there's absolutely a pre-run application for it. And again, this is going to work differently than the types of carbohydrates we identified before that are going to cause that spike, because UCAN is going to keep your blood sugar steady and you're going to go into the run with stable blood sugar. You're going to be better and more efficient at utilizing fat during that workout because you're entering that workout with stability. And then, Cathy, great application, like you talked about, adding it to a shake, using it, just to help tide your cravings during the day to maintain your blood sugar. That's all good stuff. The UCAN with protein, Greg, I'm going to have you talk a little bit about this one. I know you had you've had a lot of experience with this, the UCAN with protein. So this again has the super starch for steady blood sugar, 100 to 200 calories per serving, depending on whether you're going with the packet versus a tub. A packet is 2 scoops from a tub. This contains whey protein for satiety and for muscle recovery. And Greg, from a weight loss standpoint, you've already talked about it. But what specifically were you doing with the UCAN with protein?
Yeah, that's what I used for my meal replacement, was to use the chocolate, because I love chocolate, the recovery, UCAN recovery. And I was able to have 100 or 200 calories for my middle of the day, and that was what I used. And I wasn't hungry, so then that would buy me the time until I got to dinner. So for me, I felt like for sure I was consuming 200, 300, 400, 500 calories less per day than I would have been if I'd been eating like I normally did. And so that was just enough to have that healthy weight loss that you're looking for over time.
And really, I think 2 things that stand out about what you just said. This is not a miracle. We're not suggesting that. This is something you were doing consistently to reduce your calories over several weeks. And then additionally, it's really about that steady blood sugar. It really comes back to how it makes you feel. Like Greg, you said this a number of times, but you simply weren't feeling as hungry. So it wasn't like reducing those calories for you was especially challenging, right? Or it was easier than it would have been if you were using something that didn't control your blood sugar. Is that accurate to say? Like, this didn't seem like this is the first time you've perhaps tried this approach.
No, I think most people, we just would try not to eat. And that's a really challenging thing because you do get hungry and you want to not be hungry. I felt like curbing hunger was a good thing. And if using that strategy, I was able to lose 7 pounds over 10 weeks, which is a pretty, I think, normal kind of weight loss that people go for. So it wasn't rapid weight loss. It was something that, came over time. And I didn't do it every day. I certainly had some days that I had a regular lunch, and I was still training and racing, so I had to manipulate that, or like Cathy's words, I was strategic about how I was using it and not using it, but felt like it worked great at keeping me satiated enough that I would eat less across that day. And if you want to lose weight, then that's one of the components you got to have is you can't eat as much as you currently are. You need to eat a little bit less.
I think this application of UCAN that Greg's speaking towards, really puts it in a different light. Oftentimes you're walking into the running store, you see UCAN on the shelf next to a bunch of other sports nutrition, and you might perceive it to as a certain thing, as a product to be used only when you're in heavy training or doing long runs. But where UCAN's a totally different category is because of that blood sugar stabilization. That's just not something that the products sitting on the shelf next to UCAN are offering or even claiming they're offering. So it's really not just thinking of UCAN for steady energy before you run, but there's also a great application that what Greg just talked about, using it strategically to control blood sugar throughout the day. And we've talked at length throughout this last hour about why controlling blood sugar throughout the day is applicable for weight loss. And actually, I wanted to show this. This is a very common shake option that a lot of folks have emailed us. I know this is somewhat similar to the shake you use, Greg, perhaps a little different, but really using 1 to 2 scoops of the vanilla or chocolate UCAN with protein, some unsweetened almond milk. Soy milk works as well if you're trying to have something with lower sugar. Some peanut butter, you get some protein and fat there. And then optional would be banana for taste, avocado. Some people, again, like to get some more of the healthy fats for satiety. Blend that bad boy with ice, and a 300 to 400 calorie shake, really works great as breakfast or dessert. I'll say I start my day with this shake, some variation of it almost every morning, and find that, I'm able to control hunger much better if I were to have a similar caloric breakfast from, say, a bagel with butter or a bagel with cream cheese. So a lot of creative things you can do with UCAN. Cathy, how about the snack bars? Where do you see the UCAN snack bars fitting into somebody's day who's trying to achieve weight loss?
I think, it's the sort of grab and go mentality. I think these snack bars are so awesome when you're traveling and you know that you're not going to be able to get anything on the planes or anything like that. So as a switch up from having a shake at lunchtime, I'll often have a bar. I mean, I think they're, for recovery, I think, they're just another option. They're a different, they're just a different way to have steady blood sugar, really.
And, we had a lot of folks asking some variation of this question in the audience, whether or not we plan to offer vegan options in any of our protein products. Both the bars and the protein powders do have whey. So I can tell you that, sometime this spring, we will be coming out with a vegan UCAN snack bar. So stay tuned for that. And, even our protein powder, the powders with protein, will also be looking at vegan options for those in the near future. But, we do have a set plan to release a vegan bar in the upcoming months. So that's definitely exciting. And, what a lot of folks are doing, if they like that effect and that steady blood sugar that the super starch offers, we do have a plain starch, unflavored, just the starch, nothing else in it, that a lot of people are mixing with their own vegan protein powder. So if you're trying to achieve what Greg was doing and what Cathy's been talking about. You really just add the plain starch to a vegan protein powder of your choice. Other folks with the cinnamon UCAN, they'll add that to a vegan protein powder. I know the orange UCAN and a vanilla protein is also a popular combination. So yeah, you can get very creative. The super starch is really what you're looking for out of UCAN. That's something that UCAN has that nobody else has. So if you need to get your protein from another source to add it to the super starch, you can still achieve exactly what Greg and Cathy have been talking about. The final thing I want to talk about is from a hydration standpoint. We've had some hydration questions, and the UCAN Hydrate doesn't have the super starch in it. So it's a 0-calorie, no sugar electrolyte replacement. But Greg, in your experience, how much of that overdoing it of sugars or calories during a run is because of people's perception, of what they think they need from a hydration standpoint? Is that a big problem where runners are over consuming Gatorade or some type of drink with sugar in it because they think they just need the electrolytes?
Yeah, liquid calories are a big, big problem. I don't know that we've ever had such a quantity of liquid calories in our diet. And so that is, of course, one of the first things if you're trying to lose weight is you want to look at how many calories am I drinking and try to reduce those. That immediately means you have to get rid of all sugary drinks. You can't be having those on a regular basis as part of your regular diet and expect to have that as part of your weight loss. So that is, you just got to get rid of that. And so, but to stay hydrated, then there are options like this where you don't have calories and you can get your electrolytes in, but you don't need the sugar tagging along with the good electrolytes. And so that's one of the great things about the hydrate. But certainly when I'm working with an athlete and we're talking about weight loss strategies, first thing is, hey, you are going to have to stop drinking calories. You've got to really make smart decisions about how many calories you're getting from your drinks. And it's easy to do because, just look at what you're drinking and think about, are those calories that you want to be putting in your body when you're trying to lose weight or not?
And I think part of that, Greg, is it's also understanding the impact of those calories on blood sugar, right? Which is what we've been going through. And like you said, most of those drinks, those sugar-based sports drinks or the juices, those are going to have a negative impact on blood sugar. But that's where, if somebody understands the blood sugar impact of UCAN, they could kind of say, hey, there might be a time and place to replace that juice or that sugar-based drink with UCAN to achieve the desired effect of that stability.
Well, we have to remember those sports drinks were designed for during exercise. That's what they were designed for. But we know that the vast majority of sales of those products are just people going to a convenience store and getting it to drink as just a drink. And that is the exact wrong application of putting in very fast-acting carbohydrates. Yeah, that's supposed to be when you're at really high levels of exercise. But if you're doing it at rest, then the body is just going to have exactly the graph that we showed. It's going to have that spike. And as a result, it's going to say, okay, too much blood glucose, we need to get rid of that. Boom, then you get the insulin response. And that is exactly what we're trying to avoid, particularly with the increase in diabetes and all these problems we have with this sort of glucose insulin thing going on, and we need to be smarter about that. And liquid calories are a really great way to reduce calories and avoid so much of the spikes, since a lot of the calories in our liquids or drinks are kind of the fast-acting carbohydrate type.
And one other point is the fact that a lot of the electrolyte drinks that were designed for intense exercise do have a lot of sodium in them. So the last thing people need that have maybe they're overweight, well, they may be having blood pressure problems as well. So taking in a lot of sodium when they're not even exercising is also just sort of excess. So a lot of this is sort of about not only excess calories but other excess ingredients that you don't need all the time.
Great points, Greg and Cathy. Cathy, I wanted to pose this one specifically to you. Just take a few questions and then wrap it up here. Tammy asked this way back towards the beginning, and I wanted to try to address it. Good, I see she's still on. So she wanted to just ask if you could address the effects of menopause on weight loss. So she says she's qualified for the Boston Marathon in 2014, ran it in 2015, and since that time, she's put on about 10 pounds and that she can't shake. She hasn't changed her running habits or eating habits. The only thing that's changed is that menopause has hit her hard. This might be a webinar on its own, perhaps, but anything you can say to address Tammy's question?
Yeah, I think, I think there are issues for men, and there are issues for women that are quite separate when it comes to sort of critical times along the lifespan that pose challenges. I mean, most of us would love to be those adolescent boys that can eat anything that they want and a lot of it. But, pregnancy, menopause, there are different times when we now realize that even if you're eating the same amount, all of a sudden a lot of those calories can be turning into fat, and it is really remarkable. They first saw it with pregnancy. They could see that the person wasn't eating anymore, and yet they were actually gaining fat mass. And so there's an appreciation. So it isn't, Tammy, you're not crazy. This is very real. I think the challenges that we see from this is where research may start to help, but I don't think there's anything out there right now. I'd have to do some real searching that sort of addresses, is there a way to counteract it? And I think the main things that are to try to look to see, with the fact that with age, everyone's basal metabolism is going down. So I think part of it is that us ladies, we already don't have the same caloric requirements as men, and then as we age, it's even worse. So basically, the exercise component becomes huge because you really are trying to burn as many calories. So you may have to up your volume of exercise, but you also may have to really look at particularly junk calories during the day. I think you have to be strategic about what you're eating. But I also think that there are ways that are shown with women that even in trained women can start to increase fat oxidation. And the HIIT training, so adding in some other types of high intensity intervals, if you're not, if you're not somebody that's done that before, adding that into your weekly training, and I'm sure Greg can speak to this, but it's been shown with research that even in trained women, that can up their fat oxidation. And so in a sense, with this whole sort of transition, and it is fat, you need to counteract it by figuring out ways to burn more fat. And so being really careful not to consume a lot of carbohydrate before you work out, for sure, is another step that you can take. Also trying to add in intensity. We know that intensity versus lower intensity in general helps appetite suppression, so that even in women who tend to have triggered appetite, intense exercise generally will keep appetite at bay. So maybe even adding a sprint at the end of the workout, you can finely tune it to see whether that will keep appetite stimulation a little bit under control as well. So those are some practical tips, I guess.
Excellent, excellent, good stuff, Cathy. Let me see if there's well, you know what? I think most of what's on here pertinent to the topic. I know there's a lot of questions, folks, and I really do appreciate them, specific to UCAN for racing and some of the logistics for carrying it. And I assure you, I will respond to all of you folks who have those type of questions individually by email. I just wanted to kind of keep it, as you can see, we've gone a little long here already, keep it on topic to what folks signing up for this webinar wanted to hear about, which was really about nutrition and the application of UCAN for weight loss. But definitely you can expect an email for all those other racing related questions to me after the fact. So with Greg, I'll give you a chance to kind of sum this all up. If people listen to this and, it piqued their interest and they are kind of trying to figure out, okay, how do I get started implementing some of these tips? Is there anything that you can point people towards where it'll kind of a few strategies that can help them rethink the way they've been fueling their training?
Sure. I use several different strategies. Here are the concepts I think are important. First, if you want to lose weight for running and you're training for an event, then you want to try to lose that weight early in the training cycle when you're doing less of your race-specific training. So lose the weight early. This would really help new runners getting into the sport. Lose that weight early. That helps with injury prevention as well. The second is you have to eat clean. You've got to clean up your regular diet before you look at anything else. Most of us know what we should be eating and what we shouldn't be eating. We know we should be shopping the outside of the grocery stores, not the inside, that sort of thing. We need to get rid of as many of our liquid calories as possible. We want to look at satiation as being really important. What keeps us satiated is a stable blood glucose level, and that's why this idea of UCAN plays an important part of that. We also know that fats and proteins keep a more stable blood glucose level than regular carbohydrates. Trying to avoid the fast-acting carbohydrates or the high glycemic foods, processed carbohydrates during your regular sort of part of your diet you want to avoid. And you know, those things all together over time can help people lose weight, and it really just comes down to making a positive choice about every calorie that's going into your body. You want to think, is that something that I need? Is that the type of calorie that I want to be putting in my body? And if you're trying to lose weight, then you have to just accept that I'm going to have to change what I'm currently doing to change that, and I'm going to have to restrict a little bit what I've been doing, but try to do it in a way that you're not feeling really hungry and you're not so grumpy that nobody else in your household wants to be around you. And that's kind of where I think something like the strategy of using Generation UCAN as a meal replacement to stave off hunger after runs where you may be ravenous and you would just go and plow through the buffet. You can use the shake to kind of calm down that urge to really eat everything in the house so that you make better food choices. That to me has been, those strategies work really well for most runners who have that 5, 10, 15 pounds that they would like to lose over these next 3, 4, 5, 6 months.
Greg, great stuff as always. Always love hearing from you, and you know, get a little bit smarter every time we do this. So appreciate you being on. And if folks want to get more of your training philosophy, get more connected with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
McMillanrunning.com is the website, and we've got a lot of tools and training and coaching club opportunities for people to join in and work together toward reaching their goals.
Awesome. That's McMillanrunning.com. And for those of you still following along, I just posted that link in the chat. I'll also make sure to include a link to Greg's site in the follow-up email. Cathy, I'm going to give you the last and final word here. Anything that you'd like to add that we haven't talked about, or anything that you think is just important to reinforce before we sign up?
Wow, I think Greg did an awesome job summing it up. I think it's the slowness of it. I think you have to be persistent, but that also makes it more comfortable to do. Don't think about it as dieting really. Think about it as, where can you sort of lose a little of the excess calories that are like in the sugary drinks and things that you're not going to miss. And then you start to tune your running. And if you're somebody that has more than the 10 pounds to lose, start walking, start adding in running. You know, do things a little bit more gradually. I think the incredible success from the National Success Registry, really, the weight control registry. Basically, if you really look at it, those individuals have only lost essentially, and they've held it for about 5 years. They, you know, in the end, it's like 1 pound a week or so. It's not a lot. So I think you have to put all in and say, okay, I'm going to do this gradually and not be so concerned about it. And I think it'll make it all easier for you.
Well, that's wonderful, Cathy. Again, the same thing that I said to Greg. You know, I had the pleasure of chatting with you a lot, and I'm lucky for that. But every time we do this, there's new things that I pick up and new things that I learn. So really, really appreciate you being on here tonight. Appreciate both of you guys giving up so much time. I know we're about 20 minutes overboard here, but for everybody, for Greg McMillan and Cathy Yeckel, I'm Varun Sriram. Really want to thank all you folks for joining us tonight. Stay tuned. You know, you're gonna a lot here that you probably want to really digest, re-listen to, really understand. You guys all will, in about the next hour, be getting a follow-up email with a full recording of this session so you can access it at your convenience. I know many of you have asked me about the slides. Those will be available to you as well. So you will be getting all of that via email shortly. You guys should all have my contact info. You'll be getting it again in the follow-up email. So feel free to reach out to me with any questions, any tips, any help you need. And finally, stay tuned to that email for a very special offer. For those of you that are new to UCAN, you guys will have an opportunity to try it. For those of you that are already users and we might have given you some new ideas, you guys will have a special opportunity to get some product as well. For Greg McMillan and Cathy Yeckel, I'm Varun Sriram. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Have a good night.